Welcome to Sleep Stories and Rain, where comfort meets the chilling unknown. Tonight, we dive into truly terrifying Ouija board experiences, where whispered questions unlock doors best left closed, and the spirits that answer may never leave. If you crave bone-deep dread and supernatural suspense, you're in the right place. Only 50% of viewers are subscribed. Please hit that button and join our fearless community as we uncover haunted encounters and messages from the other side. Share your own Ouija stories in the comments. Did you ever ask a question you regretted, or feel a presence watching as you played? Your tales inspire our nightmares. Let's begin our first chilling story. The silence in our house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but a crushing empty space where laughter used to echo. My guts twisted every morning, remembering. Our little one had been gone for 6 months, but it felt like yesterday. Alex drifted through the days, a ghost herself, her eyes hollow, fixed on nothing. We tried everything. Therapy, support groups, long drawn-out talks that ended in tears. Nothing touched the raw wound. One evening, I found Alex in the attic, dust swirling around her. She held something old, flat, and dark. A Ouija board. I'd seen it before, tucked away, a forgotten curio from her grandmother's things. She looked at me, a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe madness in her eyes. What if we could just say goodbye? Her voice was a whisper, fragile as spun glass. I wanted to say no, to hold her, to tell her it was a dangerous game. But the desperation in her face was a mirror of my own. We set it up on the dining room table, the very table where we'd celebrated birthdays, done homework, shared meals. The cheap plastic planchette felt cold under our joined fingers. The instructions were yellowed and brittle, but we knew the drill. We asked over and over into the silent room. Are there any spirits present? Nothing, just the hum of the fridge and the frantic beat of my heart. Then a shiver ran through the planchette, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. My breath hitched. Alex gasped, her grip tightening on mine. Then slowly, agonizingly, the planchette began to move. Not directly, not smoothly, but with a hesitant, almost jerky motion. It slid across the board, stopping on letters. My mind raced, trying to put them together. It stopped, then moved again to another letter, then another. The board spelled out her name, our child's name. A sob tore from Alex's throat. My whole body seized up, disbelief warring with a desperate, all-consuming joy. It was her. It had to be. We cried, we laughed, we poured out our aching hearts. The board responded, spelling out comforting words, memories only we could share. It felt real, truly real. We did this every night for a week, clinging to these conversations like a lifeline. It felt like we were starting to heal, the suffocating grief finally loosening its grip. But then the messages changed. Subtle at first, a word here, a phrase there that wasn't quite right. Instead of "I miss you," it spelled "I want." My stomach dropped. Alex didn't seem to notice, lost in her desperate connection. The questions became sharper, more demanding. It started asking about our love for each other, then wanting proof of it. One night, the board spelled out, "You don't love her." I yanked my hand away, my heart pounding. Alex stared at me, tears welling. "What are you doing?" she whispered. The planchette still under her fingers trembled. Then, it slid to "He doesn't care." A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't our child. Our child would never say such hurtful things. But Alex, her eyes glazed, seemed convinced it was a sad, angry message from our little one. The entity tightened its grip on Alex, its influence twisting her thoughts. She started to change. She became paranoid, moody, whispering to herself when she thought I wasn't listening. She'd turn on me, her eyes flashing with a cruelty I'd never seen, accusing me of things, twisting my words, making me out to be the villain. Every argument, every disagreement, felt like a scene out of a twisted play, orchestrated by an unseen hand. I tried to talk to her, to show her the pattern, to make her see that the board was tearing us apart. But she just clutched it closer, defensive and deluded. She stopped sleeping, muttering about proof and tests of love. I started finding strange things around the house. Objects moved, doors creaking open and shut when no one was there. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen but deeply unsettling. It was pulling us apart, feeding on our pain, and making Alex its cruel instrument. One night, I woke to a shriek. Alex was standing at the foot of our bed, holding a kitchen knife. Her eyes were wide, black pools, her face a mask of distorted rage. "The board said you don't love me," she screamed, her voice a twisted echo of her usual gentle tone. "It says to prove it." I scrambled back terrified, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. This wasn't Alex. This was something else, wearing her skin, speaking through her mouth. The air in the room grew heavy, chilling me to the bone. I could almost feel the presence of the entity, a dark, pulsing hate radiating from the board discarded on the floor by the bed. It had latched onto her, twisted her grief, and was now making her its weapon, turning our love into something grotesque and horrifying. This was its final, cruel joke. I managed to calm her, to wrestle the knife away, but the damage was done. The love we had, already fragile, shattered into a million pieces. The entity had consumed Alex, leaving behind a shell of who she once was, filled only with suspicion and a cold, calculating anger. I left her that night, not because I stopped loving her, but because the person I loved was gone, stolen by something I couldn't fight. The house still stands, silent and empty, a constant reminder of the horrific game we played, and the love that was weaponized into something truly evil. The Ouija board still sits in the attic, a forgotten relic, waiting for another desperate soul to pick it up, to seek comfort, and to find instead a parasitic entity ready to twist their deepest feelings into a weapon. I tell myself I saved myself, but what's left of me isn't worth much. I simply survived, a ghost in my own life, haunted by a love that became a terrible, murderous thing. I still see the dark water churning under the hull, even now, years later. The salt spray tastes metallic on my tongue, even on dry land. But none of that feels real like the cold, smooth wood of the planchette, sliding across the board in the cramped cabin of the sea serpent. It was supposed to be a fun trip, just 5 of us, cruising up the coast. The Ouija board was just a laugh, something Sarah brought along to break up the long evenings. God, I wish we'd just watched movies instead. Anything but that. The sea outside was getting rough, waves slapping against the boat like angry hands. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and something else. Something I couldn't place then, but now I know was fear. We were squeezed onto the floor around a flickering lantern, the only light other than the weak beam cutting through the porthole from the moon. Sarah, always the one for spooky stuff, set the board up on an overturned cooler. Liam, the boat owner and our captain, was skeptical, arms crossed, a small smile playing on his lips. Chloe and Mark were more into it, giggling nervously, their fingers already hovering over the plastic pointer. I just sat there, feeling a prickle of unease I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the rocking of the boat, maybe it was the isolation, but I felt like we were already cut off from the world. Sarah put her fingers on the planchette first, urging us to join her. "Come on, just for fun," she said, her voice a little too bright. Slowly, one by one, we placed our fingers on the cold plastic. I remember the shared breath, the collective anticipation. It was just a toy, we told ourselves. Just plastic and cardboard. But as the boat pitched with a particularly nasty wave, the planchette twitched. Just a tiny little movement. Our eyes widened, looking at each other. Was that us? Did one of us push it? Liam snorted. "See, someone's messing around." Sarah ignored him. "Is anyone here?" she whispered. The boat creaked, a long, drawn-out groan that sounded like a living thing in pain. The wind outside had picked up, howling through the rigging. Then it moved, slowly at first, then faster. To the letter Y, then E, then S. Our fingers felt glued to the planchette. We weren't pushing. None of us were. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. Mark started to pull his hand away, but Sarah grabbed his wrist. "No! Don't break the connection." Her eyes were wide and a little wild. "What do you want?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. The planchette moved again, gliding us the board with sickening speed. Fuck, a collective gasp. Liam's smile was gone now, replaced by a grim line. "All right, that's enough," he said, his voice firm. He tried to lift the board, but it felt heavy, like it was bolted down. The planchette vibrated under our fingers. It started spelling again. FOLLOWUS. Follow us where? The boat lurched violently, sending bottles rolling and crashing to the floor. The lantern flickered and died, plunging the cabin into near darkness. Only the moonlight through the porthole offered any visibility, casting long, distorted shadows. A cold wind seemed to gust through the cabin, though the door was closed. It carried with it a smell of decay, of damp earth and something rotten. We huddled closer together, our fear a tangible thing in the suffocating dark. The planchette began to spell again, faster and faster, like whoever or whatever was moving, it was getting impatient. DOWNHERE, down here? Under the boat? Liam fumbled for his flashlight, finally clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating our pale, terrified faces. Sarah was shaking, her knuckles white where she gripped the planchette. Mark was breathing in shallow gasps. Chloe was crying silently, tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. Then we heard it, a scraping sound from below the deck, slow, deliberate, like something huge was dragging itself along the hull. Our eyes darted to each other, then to the floorboards. The boat groaned again, deeper this time, a sickening resonance that vibrated up through our feet. The scraping stopped. Silence stretched, so thick it felt like it would break. Then a single, loud thump directly beneath the cabin. The entire boat shuddered. The planchette flew off the board with a clatter, landing under the bench. We scrambled away from the board, our hands scrambling for any purchase. Liam rushed to the companionway, trying to open the hatch to the deck. It wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut from the outside. A cold dread, so absolute it felt like a physical weight, settled over me. We were trapped. Below us, the scraping started again, louder this time, interspersed with wet, gurgling sounds. It was no longer just on the hull. It was inside the boat with us. The floorboards above the bilge hatch began to creak ominously. A dark, viscous liquid started to seep through the cracks, smelling of the sea, but also of something else, something foul and unnatural. It pooled slowly, reflecting the dim moonlight like oily black mirrors. The scraping intensified, right under the hatch. We backed away further, stumbling over each other in the cramped space. Liam kept slamming against the companionway hatch, his frustration a desperate counterpoint to the rising terror. Chloe was screaming now, a raw, guttural sound. Mark was frozen, his eyes wide with horror fixed on the bilge hatch. Then, with a splintering crack, the hatch burst open. A blast of cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying with it the overwhelming stench of decay and brine. Dark water sloshed out, bringing with it something else, something large and shapeless, writhing in the dim light. It was slick and black, covered in what looked like thick, matted seaweed, but it moved with an unnatural intelligence. It smelled of the deepest parts of the ocean, of things that should not exist. It rose slowly from the opening, dripping with the foul liquid. We stumbled backward, pressing ourselves against the walls of the cabin. Nowhere left to go. Its form was indistinct, shifting and changing, but I could make out glimpses of what looked like long, slender limbs, ending in clawed digits, and eyes. Too many eyes, reflecting the moonlight like tiny, malevolent stars, scattered across its form. A wet, clicking sound filled the air as it moved, a sound that I will never forget. It lurched forward, its movements sluggish yet purposeful. Sarah screamed, a sound that was cut short as one of the dark appendages lashed out, wrapping around her leg. She was dragged screaming towards the open hatch and the dark, churning water below. Liam finally managed to wrench the companionway hatch open, stumbling onto the deck. Mark and Chloe scrambled past him, and I lunged after them, the smell of decay and the clicking sounds driving me forward. We tumbled onto the wet deck, just as the monstrous thing below us emitted a guttural roar that shook the very timbers of the boat. The boat pitched violently, and a massive wave crashed over the deck, nearly sweeping us overboard. When the water receded, I looked back at the cabin below. The opening where the bilge hatch used to be was a gaping maw, and the darkness within seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. There was no sign of Sarah. The thing was retreating back into the depths of the boat, but I knew it was still there, waiting. Liam somehow started the engine, the roar a welcome sound against the storm, and the other, more terrifying sounds coming from below. We sped away from that spot, the sea serpent listing badly, but still moving. We didn't look back at the cabin, at the horror it held. We just steered for the shore, praying we'd make it. The entire journey back was a blur of fear and adrenaline, the sounds from below deck a constant reminder of what had happened. When we finally limped into the harbor, the boat was a wreck. and we were changed. We never spoke about it, not truly. Not about the board or the voice or the thing that came from the water. We just pointed to the storm, to the rough seas. But sometimes when the wind howls just right, or I see a ship on the horizon at night, I can still hear that clicking sound. And I know it's still out there, in the dark, waiting. And I wonder if it ever truly left the sea serpent at all. Maybe it's still out there, drifting on the waves, waiting for the next set of unsuspecting people to try and speak to the darkness. The air in the attic was thick with dust and the smell of old wood rot. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet day where the silence in the house felt louder than any noise. My sister Sarah and I were supposed to be clearing it out, getting rid of junk Grandma Eleanor left behind. It felt more like digging through history than cleaning. We'd been at it for maybe an hour, sneezing through clouds of dust motes dancing in the weak light from the one small window, when Sarah yelped. Found something, I figured. Probably some weird porcelain doll with cracked eyes. Grandma had a lot of those. But this was different. She held up a flat, square object, maybe 1.5 feet wide. It was made of wood, dark and worn, with faded letters and numbers painted on its surface. An alphabet curved across the top, numbers 0 to 9 below, and yes, no, and goodbye in the corners. In the center was a star and a crescent moon. Rested on top was a small, heart-shaped piece of wood with a little window in it, a planchette. My blood felt instantly cold, like someone had poured ice water down my back. I didn't need Sarah to tell me what it was. We both knew. A Ouija board, Sarah breathed, her voice low and full of a nervous excitement that mirrored my own. It looked old, seriously old, not a shiny plastic one you'd buy at the mall. This had weight to it, a sense of history and maybe something else. We'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Sleepover tales, campfire legends about talking to spirits. But seeing one, holding one, felt entirely different. It felt real. Dangerous, even. We sat down on the dusty floorboards, the board between us. We shouldn't, I said, my voice a little shaky. My rational mind, the part that actually managed to pass math class, screamed that it was just a piece of wood. But the other part, the part that believed in shadows and things that went bump in the night, was terrified. Sarah's eyes, usually so sharp and steady, were wide and gleaming. But what if she started, then trailed off? We both knew what the what-if was. Our parents, gone 2 years ago. An accident. We never really got closure. Grandma Eleanor never talked about them much after, just shut down. Maybe the board could help, maybe it could give us answers. It was a stupid idea, I knew it even then, but the ache in my chest, that constant dull throb of grief, pushed the fear aside. We placed our fingertips lightly on the planchette. The wood felt smooth under my skin, surprisingly warm. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just breathing, the dust motes still dancing around us. The only sound was the distant chirp of a bird outside the small window. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Is anyone there?" Sarah whispered. Nothing. We waited longer. Still nothing. I felt a rush of relief tinged with disappointment. See? Just a silly old board. I started to pull my hand away. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the planchette moved. It glided across the board smoothly under our fingers. It wasn't a jerky movement like one of us pushing it. It was a slow, deliberate glide. Our eyes met, wide with shared terror and exhilaration. It stopped over the letter M, then A, then R. My breath hitched. Our mother's name was Mary. The planchette moved again. Why? A cold wave washed over me. Okay, this was getting real. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The planchette moved to Y, then E, then S. Yes, it was her. It had to be. A knot of emotion tightened in my throat. This was what we'd secretly hoped for, what we'd been afraid of. "It's you, isn't it?" I asked, my voice thick. This time, the planchette flew across the board to Y, then E, then S. A little faster this time. We spent the next hour asking questions, simple ones at first. "Are you happy? Are you with Dad?" The responses were short, sometimes just a yes, sometimes a single letter. It felt right, like we were finally connecting with them. But then Sarah asked a question that changed everything. "Why didn't Grandma Eleanor ever talk about you?" The planchette hesitated. It hovered over the board for a long time, longer than any other movement. Then very slowly it began to spell. S-E-C-T, secret. A cold dread began to creep in. What secret? The planchette started spelling again, faster now. Hush, hush. Don't talk about it. My hands felt clammy on the planchette. This didn't feel like our mom anymore, not the warm, loving memory we held on to. This felt guarded, cold. We kept pushing. What secret? Tell us. The planchette moved wildly for a moment, circling the board before slamming to a stop over NO. A definitive, chilling NO. Suddenly, the attic air grew colder. The dust motes seemed to swirl faster. A floorboard creaked loudly behind us, though neither of us were near it. We froze, listening. Nothing, just the accelerated pounding of our own hearts. The planchette started to move again, this time without us asking a question. It went to D, then A, then N, G, R, danger. My blood ran cold. Goodbye, I choked out, trying to pull my fingers away. The planchette resisted, digging into the wood slightly. Sarah was also trying to lift her fingers, her face pale. The planchette started to spell again, faster and faster, a frantic scraping sound on the wood. G-E-T-O-U-T, get out. The air around us was buzzing now, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The shadows in the corners of the attic seemed to deepen, shifting and stretching like they were alive. We both yanked our hands away from the planchette, our hearts pounding like drums. We scrambled backward, away from the board, tripping over old boxes and sheets. As we watched, horrified, the planchette moved on its own. It slid to the word goodbye, but it didn't stop there. It moved past it, sliding off the edge of the board and clattering onto the dusty floorboards. A gust of wind, cold and unnatural, swept through the attic, though the window was closed. The air grew heavy, thick with a sense of intense anger and malice. Then, from the darkest corner of the attic, where the shadows were thickest, we heard a sound, a soft, wet, whispering sound. It was our names, twisted, distorted. My name, Sarah's name. It sounded like it was right behind us. We didn't look. We didn't need to. We scrambled to the narrow attic stairs, fumbling with the latch, our hands trembling. We burst out of the attic and slammed the door shut, leaning against it, gasping for breath. Downstairs, the house felt different, colder, quieter, in a way that felt wrong. We stayed close together, jumping at every creak of the old house. That night, neither of us slept. We lay in our beds, listening to the sounds that weren't there before. The faint scratching at the windows, too high up for anything natural. The soft, wet whispering, sometimes sounding like distant voices, sometimes like someone was right outside our doors. And sometimes we heard it spelling, in echoes from the walls, G-E-T-O-U-T. It knew our names. It was here because we invited it. And it wasn't going anywhere. I've never been the same since that night. The night the board spelled out, her name is Ashes. It was a stupid idea. A late-night dare fueled by too much soda and boredom, but the kind of stupid that claws its way into your memory and refuses to let go. We were just kids then, thought we knew everything, especially how to mess with things we didn't understand. It started with a whisper, then a faint scratching. My palms were sweating, sticking to the smooth, cool surface of the planchette. I could feel the eyes of my friends on me, their breaths held tight. The attic was dark, save for the weak glow of a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with every heartbeat. Dust motes floated in the dim light, heavy and suffocating. A storm was brewing outside, the wind rattling the old window panes like someone was trying to get in. Wet asked, "Is anyone here?" And for a long moment, nothing. Just the creak of the old house and the nervous cough of my friend. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the planchette began to move. It glided over the worn wood towards YES. A collective gasp, then silence again, deeper than before. We tried to be brave, to laugh it off, but our voices were thin and reedy. Next, the board spelled out, her name is Ashes. The letters felt etched into my mind, each one a cold, sharp point. The air grew colder, like someone had left a freezer door open. My breath plumed out in front of me, even though it was hardly winter. No one had even touched a window. Then an old porcelain doll, perched on a dusty trunk across the room, slowly toppled over. Its glass eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, unblinking. We all looked at each other, wide-eyed, our earlier bravado completely gone. It wasn't a joke anymore. This was real. The questions came in a rush after that, fueled by a terrifying mix of fear and twisted curiosity. "What do you want?" My friend, always the most impulsive, practically shouted it. The planchette moved again, this time with a frantic, jerky motion. It spelled out, "Your soul." A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The single bare bulb flickered, briefly plunging the room into darkness, then back to its weak glow. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, taking on grotesque shapes in our peripheral vision. We were trapped in that tiny attic, the storm outside now a roaring beast, and something uninvited lingering inside with us. The doll's eyes, even from where it lay on the floor, seemed to follow our movements. Then came the scratching, louder this time, from inside the walls. It sounded like dozens of nails dragging on old plaster, a sickening, drawn-out sound that prickled every hair on my arms. We huddled closer, shoulders brushing, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. The planchette moved yet again, spelling out, "She is coming." I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The scratching grew more intense, moving from one wall to another, circling us. The attic became a cage of sound, each scratch a little closer, a little more desperate. Suddenly, the planchette flew off the board, hitting the wall with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. The bare bulb above us burst, showering us with tiny shards of glass, and the attic was thrown into complete darkness. A horrifying stench filled the air, like damp earth and decay, and something else, something metallic and sharp. My friend beside me began to wheeze, struggling for breath. We scrambled, blind in the pitch black, tripping over boxes and forgotten furniture. I could hear whimpers, choked gasps, and the terrifying sound of something unseen moving fast in the room with us. A cold, skeletal hand seemed to brush my cheek, leaving a trail like ice. I screamed, a raw, animal sound, and felt my way towards the attic door, fumbling desperately for the latch. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, but it wouldn't turn. It was like the door had been sealed shut. Panic set in completely, a wave of pure terror washing over me. We were trapped with whatever Ashes was, and she was here. She was right here. I don't know how long we were there, trapped in that suffocating darkness with the unseen presence. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The stench grew stronger, the air heavier, making it hard to breathe. I heard a soft, wet thud, and then silence. A terrifying, absolute silence, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the distant howl of the wind. I didn't dare move, didn't dare open my eyes, even if I could see anything. I just stayed there, frozen, waiting for something else to happen, for the touch to return, for the voice to whisper again. But nothing. Just the silence. After what felt like an eternity, a sliver of light appeared under the attic door, and I saw my chance to escape. I pushed with all my might, the old latch springing open with a groaning crack. I tumbled down the stairs, not caring if I broke something, just needing to be out. I never looked back, never went into that attic again. The others, they were pale, shaken, but they followed. We never spoke of it again, not really. But every once in a while, when the wind howls and the house groans, I smell that terrible stench, and I hear her name is Ashes whispering in the dark. And I know she's still there, waiting. Because some things, once opened, can never truly be closed. The air in the attic that night felt thick, like breathing underwater, even before we found the board. It wasn't just dust, it was something heavy, something old and wrong. My hand still trembles thinking about it, remembering the awful, ancient chill that crawled over my skin the moment Liam brushed off the layer of grime. We'd been bored, stuck inside while the rain hammered against the roof of Ben's old house, a place that always creaked and groaned like it was about to fall down. Liam, always the one looking for a thrill, had suggested exploring the attic, knowing Ben's family hadn't touched the stuff up there in decades. The box was tucked away in a corner, under a pile of moth-eaten blankets. It was dark wood, intricately carved with symbols none of us recognized. The planchette inside wasn't smooth plastic like the cheap ones you see. It was polished stone, heavy and cool to the touch. There was a strange symbol on the back of it, like a spiral made of knotted ropes. Chills, I tell you. Immediate chills. We talked ourselves into it, of course. It's just a game, Ben had mumbled, though even his voice lacked conviction. Chloe, usually the most cautious, was quiet, her hazel eyes fixed on the strange symbols. Liam, naturally, was already pushing the box open, eager to see what was inside. The board itself was large. It had the letters and numbers drawn in a script that looked foreign and unsettling. The word yes was in a fancy looping script. No was stark and angular. The sun, moon, and goodbye glyphs were unlike anything I'd ever seen on a board before, distorted and almost menacing. It wasn't like those novelty shop things. This felt weighty, significant. We sat in a circle on the dusty floor, our knees almost touching, the single bare bulb overhead casting long, dancing shadows that made the attic feel even bigger and emptier. Liam placed his finger on the planchette first, then Chloe, then Ben, and finally me. It felt wrong, like touching something that shouldn't be touched. We started simple, asking if anyone was there. The planchette didn't move at first. We asked again, our voices barely louder than whispers. Then slowly, it began to glide. Not jerky, like one of us was pushing it, but with a smooth, deliberate motion. It moved to the Y, then E, then S. A collective gasp escaped us. It was real. Or at least, it felt real in that moment. We asked who we were talking to. The planchette zipped across the board, spelling out a name that sounded ancient and guttural, like stones grinding together, Zthar. None of us had ever heard a name like it. My palms were sweating. Ben looked pale. Things got weird fast. We asked Zthar about the house. The planchette moved to numbers, spelling out dates that were impossibly old, far older than the house itself. Then letters, forming words that didn't make sense, fragments of things that felt like they belonged to dreams or nightmares. We asked Zthar about ourselves. This is where the real fear set in. It started telling us things it shouldn't know. Ben's fear of heights, which he almost never talked about. Chloe's recurring nightmare about drowning. My own secret, the one I never told anyone, not even them, about the time I almost fell off that cliff as a kid. It knew our deepest, most private fears. This wasn't just some random spirit. This felt hungry. The air in the attic grew colder, bitingly so, even though the rain had stopped and the wind outside had died down. The single bulb overhead flickered violently, casting the room into near darkness for moments at a time. When the light returned, the shadows seemed to have deepened, twisting into shapes that weren't there before. The reflections in the dusty window panes seemed to move. Zthar started asking us questions, not simple ones. Questions about things that had happened before we were born, things that felt like they belonged to the deep past, to a time when things were different. It asked about a sacrifice, a binding. Confusion and dread swirled together in my gut. We tried to pull our fingers away from the planchette, but it felt like they were stuck, glued to the smooth stone by an invisible force. Just then, the attic door, which we had propped open, slammed shut with a deafening bang. We all jumped, our hearts hammering against our ribs. Outside the small attic window, the sky, which had been dark but clear just moments before, began to swirl with unnatural, sickly-colored clouds. The light from the bulb went out completely, plunging us into total darkness save for the faint, eerie glow emanating from the symbols on the Ouija board itself. The planchette began to move on its own now, faster and faster, spinning erratically across the board as if controlled by a frantic, unseen hand. A low hum started in the room, growing in intensity, vibrating through the floorboards and into our bones. It wasn't a sound I recognized. It felt less like noise and more like a feeling, a pressure that was building, building, building. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and writhe, detaching themselves from the walls. We could hear whispering now, too, from all directions, multiple voices speaking at once in languages that sounded ancient and alien. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard. The air crackled with static and the scent of decay filled the small space. The planchette stopped abruptly, resting on the goodbye glyph, but the pressure didn't ease. Instead, it intensified. Then, from the darkest corner of the attic, a shape began to form. It was indistinct at first, like a deeper shadow, but it grew, taking on a form that was all sharp angles and impossible proportions. It moved towards us, not walking, but gliding across the floor, the whispering voices rising to a frantic, deafening chorus. Terror, pure and absolute, seized me. I finally managed to wrench my fingers away from the planchette, the cold stone leaving a burning imprint on my skin. Ben and Chloe were already scrambling back, their faces pale and contorted with fear. Liam, frozen for a moment, let out a choked cry. We stumbled over each other in the darkness, desperate to get away from the growing shape, from the unbearable pressure, from the ancient, hungry dread that had filled the attic. We fumbled for the door, our hands slick with sweat. Ben yanked it open, and we spilled out onto the landing, collapsing in a heap on the stairs, gasping for breath. The attic door slammed shut behind us again, and the strange light and the oppressive feeling vanished. We sat there for a long time, huddled together, the sound of our ragged breathing the only noise in the quiet house. We didn't go back up. Not ever. We didn't talk about what happened. Not really. But I see it sometimes in the corner of my eye, the flicker of an unnatural shadow, the distant echo of a whispered word I can't understand. I know Zethar is still out there, or maybe inside, waiting. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that we didn't just play a game that night. We opened a door that was never meant to be opened, and something ancient, something terrible, looked back at us from the other side. The scar above Liam's eyebrow seems darker now, almost bruised looking, and Ben still has those dark circles under his eyes, deeper than ever before. Chloe doesn't wear her nose ring anymore. She said it started to feel too cold against her skin. We try to live normal lives, but the memory of that night, of the chill, the whispers, and the shape in the dark, is always there, a whisper away, a reminder that some doors should stay closed. The smell of old wood and something acrid, clinging like a damp shroud, still makes my stomach churn sometimes. It was the night the attic door, the one Wed always kept locked, creaked open on its own. Wed just gotten comfortable with the planchette, laughing a little at first, pretending it was just our fingers twitching. Then the whispers started, just at the edges of my hearing, like dry leaves skittering across a cold floor. It wasn't the board that scared me first. It was the feeling of being watched, the air getting heavy like before a thunderstorm. And then, the true horror began. We were holed up in a dusty corner of the old house, huddled around the Ouija board. The flickering candlelight made our shadows dance like ghouls on the walls. 3 of us, me, River, and Sage. We thought it was a game, a way to pass the time on a restless autumn night. River had found the board in a forgotten chest in the attic, nestled beneath yellowed newspapers and moth-eaten blankets. It looked ancient, the wood dark and smooth from countless hands, its letters faded but still clear. Wed laughed, made jokes about contacting friendly ghosts, maybe even winning lottery numbers. River, always the skeptic with a mischievous grin, had started us off. He asked some silly questions, and we all giggled when the planchette wobbled, then slowly, deliberately, moved to words that made no sense. We blamed each other, of course, pushing harder on the planchette, trying to trick each other. Then the temperature in the room dropped, like someone had thrown open a freezer door. Goosebumps rose on my arms, despite the warmth of the roaring fire. Sage, usually so quiet and observant, whimpered. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The planchette started to move on its own, not with our pushes, but smoothly, gliding across the board. Our eyes widened, fixated on its path. It spelled out hello. Our laughter died in our throats. River, trying to sound brave, asked, "Who are you?" The planchette paused, then slowly began to spell again. The house. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the cold air. This wasn't a game anymore. The questions continued, each answer more unsettling than the last. We asked how many were there. The board spelled out many. We asked what they wanted. The board spelled out to play. Sage started to cry, her shoulders shaking. River was pale, his usual confidence gone, replaced by a strained look of fear. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The air grew heavier, thick and suffocating. The whispers I heard before grew louder, or maybe they just seemed louder in the sudden silence of the room. It sounded like a cacophony of hushed voices, like 100 people talking at once, just beyond my hearing. The candlelight flickered wildly, casting huge, dancing shadows that seemed to grab at us. A portrait on the wall, one of an old woman with cold, dead eyes, seemed to watch us, her painted lips curving into a silent, knowing smile. A sudden, sharp rap came from upstairs, from the very attic where the board had been found. It sounded like knuckles on wood, loud and demanding. We looked at each other, eyes wide with terror, not daring to move, not daring to speak. The planchette started moving again, faster this time, darting across the board. It completely ignored our questions, spelling out new words one after another rapidly. Open, it spelled. Then, the door, followed by, we are here. A cold dread filled me. It wasn't just the rap from the attic anymore. It was like the house itself was groaning, timbers shifting, every floorboard creaking under an unseen weight. The air filled with that foul, acrid smell I mentioned, the kind that sticks in your throat and makes your eyes water. Then, with a slow, agonizing groan that echoed through the entire house, the attic door, the one that had been locked for years, slowly creaked open. A sliver of inky blackness, darker than the night outside, showed in the gap. No light came from it, just a deeper shadow, and the temperature in the room dropped even further, an icy blast that took my breath away. We screamed, all of us, a raw sound of pure terror. We scrambled back, pushing away from the table, from the board, from the now open doorway to the attic. The whispers grew into a low hum, a vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very walls. The air was thick with the foul smell, and a new one, like stale earth and decay. From the attic doorway, something moved within the oppressive darkness. It was slow, barely perceptible, a darker shadow within the already absolute black. The planchette, still on the board, began to spin rapidly, like a top, then shot off the table and shattered against the far wall. The candles around us suddenly blew out, one by one, leaving us in complete darkness, save for the faint, unsettling glow from the Ouija board itself, which cast an eerie light on the terrifying scene. We scrabbled to our feet, desperate to escape, but the darkness was disorienting, and the things that had been whispers were now growing, stretching, whispering our names. "Join us," they hissed, from all directions, from the floor, the ceiling, the walls. River fumbled for his phone, its flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but it was too late. From the open attic door, a form began to emerge, not quite solid, twisting and reforming like smoke given a skeletal shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its presence filled the room with palpable malevolence. Its eyes, if it had them, were like pinpricks of pure, hungry darkness. One long, bony finger extended from its smoky form, pointing directly at us. The house itself groaned, a sound of immense, ancient hunger. The last thing I saw before we burst through the front door, scattering into the night, was the Ouija board, glowing faintly on the floor. And as we ran, the echoing whispers were no longer in my head, but seemed to chase us, rattling the very leaves on the trees. We never went back to that house. None of us ever talked about it properly, not really. But the scent of old wood, the acrid smell, the whispers on the wind, and the memory of that impossibly dark doorway, they cling to me like old sins. They are always there, just in the periphery, waiting for the attic door to creak open again. I can still hear them sometimes, whispering my name, just outside the edge of my sanity. The air up in Gramps' attic always smelled like dust and forgotten things, a mix of old wood, mothballs, and something else, something dry and still. None of us should have been up there. Gramps had rules about the attic after Grandma died, quiet rules, but everyone in the family knew. But teenagers think rules are suggestions, especially when it's a rainy Friday night and there's nothing else to do but stare at screens. We found the board tucked away in a wooden crate under some moth-eaten blankets. It felt heavy, the wood dark and smooth under our fingers. It wasn't one of those flimsy cardboard ones you buy at the store. This looked old, handmade maybe. The letters were carved deep, the numbers worn smooth in places. It felt important, like it had been waiting. Mark, always the jock but easily bored, nudged it with his toe. "What is this thing?" Sarah, my girlfriend, with her messy red hair and bright green eyes, recognized it immediately. Her face went a little pale under the flickering bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "It's a Ouija board. My aunt told me stories about these." Chloe, with her sharp black bob and dark, almost too knowing eyes, scoffed. "Seriously? You guys believe in that stuff?" Chloe was the edgy one, the one who pretended nothing scared her. She wore her silver nose ring like armor. I, Jake Lanky, clumsy Jake with the messy brown hair, picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "Come on, it'll be fun. Just for kicks." My blue eyes probably held too much easy confidence. I always thought I was smarter than things like superstition. Sarah looked hesitant. her freckles standing out against her pale skin. Mark, with his muscular build and athletic wear, just shrugged. Sure, why not? Let's see if we can talk to aliens or something. We cleared a space on the dusty floor, the silence of the attic pressing in around us. The rain outside drummed a steady beat on the roof tiles. We placed the planchette, a heart-shaped piece of wood with a small magnifying glass in the middle on the board. We put our fingertips lightly on it. 4 pairs of fingers tracing the outline of the heart. It felt strangely formal, like a tiny, ridiculous ceremony. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Is anyone there? Nothing. The planchette didn't budge. The dust motes danced in the weak light. Chloe rolled her eyes. See, told you it was dumb. Sarah shivered, pulling her oversized sweater tighter. Maybe we're not doing it right. Mark laughed, a low sound in the quiet. Maybe we need to call on a really famous ghost, like Elvis. But as I was about to agree with Chloe, the planchette moved, just a tiny twitch. We all froze. Sarah gasped softly. My heart gave a weird little lurch in my chest. Were we pushing it? Was someone cheating? We all looked at each other, eyes wide. It moved again, slower this time, dragging across the polished wood. It drifted towards the letter Y, then E, then S. Y-E-S. It spelled it out clearly. A coldness started to seep into the attic, different from the general chill of the old building. It felt like a draft, but there were no open windows other than the sealed one in the gable end, thick with cobwebs. Okay, who's moving it? Chloe demanded, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Not me, Mark said quickly. Sarah and I both shook our heads. Our fingers barely touched the planchette, the pressure light as air. Who are you? I asked, my voice a little shaky now. It felt real, too real. The planchette started to move faster, darting from letter to letter. N-O-H-U-M-A-N, not human. That sent a fresh wave of fear through me. My scar above my eyebrow felt tight. Sarah squeezed my hand, her fingers cold. The questions came faster, fueled by a terrified curiosity. What do you want? To P-L-A-Y. Where are you? H-E-R-E. Always H-E-R-E. The last word seemed to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then the whispering started, not from the board, but around us. A low, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was faint at first, easy to mistake for the rain or the old house settling. But it grew, weaving in and out of the silence. It sounded like many voices speaking at once, too low to understand, a constant, unsettling murmur. The planchette spelled out, L-I-S-T-E-N, and the whispering intensified, seeming to come from the very walls themselves. We pulled our fingers off the planchette as if it had burned us. The sudden lack of contact felt wrong, like breaking a circuit. The whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, more distinct. Names. It was saying our names. Sarah, Mark, Chloe, Jake. My name, whispered from the shadows in the corners of the attic, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. It wasn't just a game anymore. Panic started to set in. We need to get out of here, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We scrambled up, bumping into each other in our haste. We didn't put the board away. We just left it there on the dusty floor, the planchette still on it. Going downstairs felt like walking through thicker air. The whispers followed, fainter now, but still there, like a persistent echo. Out of the attic and into the hallway of Gramps' old house. It should have felt safer, familiar. But the shadows seemed deeper, the corners darker than usual. Over the next few days, the weirdness didn't stop. It escalated. The whispering continued, sometimes louder, sometimes barely audible, always just on the edge of hearing. It wasn't confined to the attic. It was in our rooms, in the kitchen, even outside. It felt like whatever we had contacted was spreading through the house like spilled ink on blotting paper. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching. Not outside, not on the roof, but inside the walls of my bedroom. It was frantic, insistent, like something trying to claw its way out. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The scratching stopped as soon as I moved. I tried to tell myself it was just mice, but it sounded bigger, more deliberate. Then the figures started, at the edge of my vision. Just fleeting glimpses of movement in the periphery. Dark shapes, tall and thin, standing just out of sight around corners or at the end of hallways. When I looked directly, they were gone. But the feeling of being watched was constant. It was like the air itself was holding its breath around them. Sarah was having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams about the attic and the board. In her dreams, the whispering became clear, twisting her worst fears into horrifying scenarios. She started avoiding being alone, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a constant anxiety. She held my hand tighter, her eyes wide and scared. Mark, the confident athlete, started getting jumpy. Head spin around suddenly, convinced someone was behind him. He said he heard his name called from empty rooms. The birthmark on his neck seemed to stand out more against his pale skin. He tried to cover it with collars, but the fear was evident in his eyes. Chloe, the one who scoffed, was the worst. She completely withdrew, her edgy confidence shattered. She barely spoke, her dark eyes vacant and haunted. She said she saw shadows in her room when the light was on, figures standing in her mirror that weren't her reflection. The silver nose ring seemed small and fragile now. The whispers got bolder. They weren't just names anymore. They were taunts, threats, promises of pain. They seemed to know things about us, small embarrassing secrets, moments of shame we thought no one else knew. It felt deeply personal, like the entity was inside our heads, feeding on our fear. It reached a terrifying peak one evening. We were all at my place, huddled together in the living room, trying to pretend everything was normal, watching a movie. The whispers were louder than ever, cutting through the sound of the TV. Then the scratching started again. This time from the attic access panel in the ceiling above us. It was loud, violent, like something desperate to get through. Dust sifted down from the panel. Suddenly the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breaths plumed in the air. The lights flickered wildly, then died completely, plunging us into darkness. The scratching stopped. The whispering stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the attic above us. Footsteps on the floorboards, moving towards the access panel. Heavy footsteps. Not like a person. Something ponderous. Something with weight. We huddled together, frozen in terror. The air was thick with a foul metallic smell, like old blood and rust. We could hear fumbling at the attic panel above, a low groan, like old wood straining. Then a loud, splintering crack. Something dropped from the ceiling. Not a person. It was a shadow, deeper and more absolute than any shadow should be. It hit the floor with a soft thud, absorbing the light around it. It unfolded, this impossibly tall, thin figure made of pure darkness. It had no features, just an outline against the dimness of the room, illuminated only by the faint light from the streetlights outside creeping in through the curtains. It moved towards us, silent and swift. We scattered, screaming. Mark tried to run for the door, but the shadow was faster. It reached out a long, thin arm, and Mark was lifted into the air, struggling, a choked cry escaping his lips. The shadow seemed to absorb him, pulling him into itself. His screams cut off abruptly. When the shadow lowered its arm, he was gone. Sarah was sobbing, pulling me towards the back door. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with horror, before she turned and bolted towards the kitchen. The shadow turned towards her, its form shimmering slightly. I grabbed Sarah's hand, dragging her towards the back door. My leg caught on something, and I stumbled, pulling her down with me. We scrambled on the floor, the gritty dust on the wood scraping our knees. The whispering returned, swirling around us, no longer faint but a deafening chorus of malicious laughter. I saw Chloe in the kitchen doorway for a second, a flash of her black hair, before something huge and fast moved in the shadows behind her. A sickening thud echoed from the kitchen. Another scream, cut short. Only Sarah and I were left. The shadow figures were everywhere now, not just one, but many, emerging from the corners of the room, from behind furniture, from the walls themselves. They were long and thin, their forms shifting and rippling like heat haze. They moved with an unnatural grace, silent and purposeful. They were hunting us. We crawled towards the back door, fear lending me strength I didn't know I had. The doorknob was cold and slick with condensation or something worse. My hands trembled, fumbling with the lock. Behind us, the whispers grew louder, closer. The sound of their silent movement filled the room. I finally got the door open, and we burst out into the rainy night, gasping for air. We didn't look back. The sound of the rain and our own ragged breaths, the only sounds in the world, trying to outrun the silence and the shadows we knew were just behind us. They never followed us out of the property line, not directly, but the feeling of being watched never left. The whispers followed, sometimes faint, sometimes vivid in my mind. Sarah is different now, quieter, jumpier. We don't talk about that night. We don't talk about Mark or Chloe. The attic is sealed, locked, and I don't think Gramps will ever go up there again. But I know they are still there, in the dust and the forgotten things waiting for someone else to find the board, waiting to play again. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, or the house settles in the dead of night, I swear I can hear the faint, dry scratching coming from inside the walls, and I know they remember us. The smell of old dust and the faint scent of something like burnt sugar still clings to my memory, even after all these years. It was the night the attic became more than just a storage space. It became a doorway. It started with a dare, like most terrible things do. Me, Jess, and Chris huddled around a dusty Ouija board Wed found in a box of old junk, the kind of box that smelled of forgotten lives. We were just messing around, laughing, trying to scare each other. The old house creaked around us, the wind outside scratching at the windows like skeletal fingers. Jess, giggling, put her fingers on the planchette first, then Chris. I was last, my hand shaking a little, even though I told myself it was just the nerves of a cold night. We asked it silly questions at first. Who likes who? Will we pass our math test? The planchette didn't move. Not at all. Jess joked about it being broken. Then Chris, always the one for drama, said, "Is anyone here with us?" The air in the attic seemed to thicken, suddenly heavy and cold, even though the old house was usually drafty. The planchette twitched, just a tiny little shudder beneath our fingers. We all looked at each other, eyes wide. It was probably one of them pushing it, right? But none of us admitted to it. Then, slowly, almost against our will, the planchette began to slide. It moved to yes. My breath hitched in my throat. Jess' giggle died. Chris just stared, his face pale in the dim light of the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. We asked it again, "Are you really here?" The planchette flew across the board to yes this time, hitting the word with a sharp click that made us all jump. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely a rustle. The planchette moved, slow and deliberate, spelling out Lily. A shiver ran down my spine. We didn't know any Lily. Jess, trying to be brave, pushed on. "What do you want, Lily?" The planchette moved with an unnerving speed, spelling out Play. We exchanged nervous glances. Play what? We didn't ask. Instead, Chris, always pushing boundaries, said, "Show us you're real." The light bulb above us flickered, then went out, plunging the attic into darkness. We screamed, a shared, strangled sound. Jess fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, showing dust motes dancing in the air. The planchette was still on the board, but it had spun around, now pointing to the goodbye at the bottom. We were breathing hard, our hearts pounding like drums. "Let's just put it away," Jess whispered, her voice trembling. We agreed, pulling our hands off the planchette. But as we did, the board itself seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that we could feel in our bones. We heard a soft rustling sound from the corner, like something being dragged across the floor. We all spun towards it, Jess' phone beam shakily following. Nothing, just shadows and piles of old boxes. We tried to get out of there, but the pull we felt, a cold, insistent tug, was too strong, like a string tied to each of our chests. We felt drawn back to the board. Chris, against his better judgment, asked, "Are you still here, Lily?" The planchette, of its own accord, moved. It spelled out Youaretrapped. Panic flared. Jess started crying, big, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I felt a cold touch on my ankle, like an icy hand, and I jumped back, tripping over a forgotten trunk. Chris yelled and pointed. A shadow, darker than any shadow should be, writhed in the corner of the room, slowly stretching, almost like it was reaching for us. It pulsed, grew, and then from its center a thin, pale arm, impossibly long, began to extend. The air in the room dropped several degrees, the kind of cold that chills you right to your core. The planchette, twitching violently, spelled out HESTEPPEDTHE. Jess screamed, pointing to a small wooden doll she'd picked up earlier, which was now rocking gently back and forth on its own, its painted eyes seeming to stare at us with an unnerving intensity. The room was filled with a low, whispering sound, like 1,000 tiny voices. The shadows stretched further, its edges blurring, becoming something almost solid. The dusty attic, once a place of childhood hiding spots, now felt like a cage shrinking around us. The doll fell over, clattering against the dusty floorboards. Then the whispers stopped. A new sound filled the air, a wet, guttural breathing, like someone struggling to catch their breath. The shadow in the corner pulsed once more, and then an almost human shape began to pull itself out of it. It was thin, skeletal, with long, stringy hair that clung to its face. Its eyes, deep-set and empty, fixed on us. We scrambled back, but there was nowhere to go. The board seemed to glow faintly now, words flickering across its surface, too fast to read, a torrent of silent, desperate messages. The thing from the shadow took a step towards us. The air grew heavy with the smell of decay. I remember thinking, this isn't just about a game anymore. This is real. The last thing I saw before I pushed Chris towards the attic door was Jess, frozen, staring at the figure and the Ouija board, a black X forming over the words, then fading. We barely made it out, tumbling down the narrow stairs, gasping for air. We never went back to that attic. We boarded up the door and sealed it off. But sometimes when the wind howls just right, I swear I can still hear the faint creak of the floorboards above, or the soft, rustling sound of something being dragged across the floor. And sometimes late at night I wonder about Lily and what she wanted to play. I remember the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the way the campfire smoke stung your eyes. It was supposed to be just another camping trip with my buddies, Kevin, Mark, and Sarah. A few days away from everything, under the stars. We packed the usual stuff: tent, sleeping bags, way too much junk food. But Kevin, being Kevin, had to bring something extra. Something different. He pulled it out of his backpack with a grin that made my stomach knot up right away. It was old, the wood cracked and faded, chipped around the edges like teeth that had seen better days. A Ouija board. "No way, man," I said, my voice maybe a little too loud. I'd heard stories. Everyone had. Things you shouldn't mess with. Especially out here, miles from anywhere with nothing but trees and the dark all around. Kevin just laughed, setting it down on a flat rock near the fire. Sarah gave me a look, half annoyed, half curious. Mark just shrugged. He was always up for whatever, good or bad. We ate hot dogs that tasted vaguely of smoke and plastic, and then as the fire crackled and the shadows stretched long, Kevin brought it out again. The planchette was cold and smooth under my fingers as I reluctantly joined them around the board. We put our fingertips on it, just like the instructions said, in the dim glow of our lanterns and the dying fire. The air felt heavy, thick, like something was holding its breath, waiting. Kevin asked the first question, his voice a little shaky despite his bravado. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment, nothing, just the sound of the wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Then, slow, like it was moving through thick mud, the planchette started to slide. Not a jump or a shove, just a smooth, slow drag. My skin prickled. Mark's eyes were wide in the lamplight. Sarah let out a small gasp. The board spelled out YES. My heart was pounding against my ribs. We asked more questions. Stupid questions, mostly. "Are you friendly?" The board spelled out NO. A cold dread started to spread through me. "What do you want?" This time the planchette moved faster, like it was eager to answer. It spelled out TOPLA. Play? What kind of play? Before we could ask anything else, the wind picked up, not a gentle breeze, but a harsh whipping wind that made the trees groan and sway like they were in pain. The fire spat sparks high into the air, and for a second, I thought I saw something dark and fast flicker at the edge of the campsite. When it died down, the planchette was still, dead on the board. We decided to pack it up. It wasn't funny anymore. The fun was gone, replaced by a real bone-deep fear. We folded the board, put the planchette away, but the feeling didn't go away. It clung to us, cold and heavy. We tried to talk, to laugh, to shake it off, but every little sound in the woods made us jump. A twig snapping, a rustle in the leaves. It all sounded like something was watching us, moving closer. We huddled inside the tent, 4 of us crammed together, pretending to sleep. But nobody was sleeping. Every few minutes, one of us would stiffen, hearing something outside. A soft scraping sound, like claws on bark. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, wishing more than anything that I wasn't there. That I was home, safe in my bed. Suddenly, something hit the side of the tent. Not a branch, it was too solid, too heavy, then another and another, like fists pounding against the thin fabric. We froze, barely breathing. A rip appeared in the tent material, a dark tear like a cruel smile. Through it, I saw something dark and impossibly thin snake inside. It was black, like dried blood, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural speed. My throat was dry, silent. Sarah screamed. We scrambled out of the tent, stumbling over each other into the cold night air. The lanterns were flickering, casting wild, jumping shadows. The air was filled with that low whispering sound now, closer, clearer. It wasn't words I could understand, but it felt like pure hate, like a promise of pain. We ran, blindly, tripping over roots and logs. Behind us, the sound followed, gaining on us, faster than anything natural. We could hear branches snapping, heavy feet pounding the ground. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs ached. We didn't look back. We couldn't. Finally, we burst out of the trees and onto the dusty dirt road that led back to civilization. We ran down the road, not stopping until the lights of the nearest town were just visible in the distance. We didn't stop until we were gasping for air, collapsing on the side of the road. We never went back for our gear. We never talked about what we saw. Not really. Not in detail. But the memory, the feeling of that thing chasing us, the way it sounded, it's still with me. Every time I close my eyes in the dark, I hear that whispering, and I wonder what would have happened if it had caught us. What kind of play it wanted. We left the Ouija board there in the woods. I don't know what became of it. Maybe it's still there, waiting for someone else to find it, to ask if anyone is there, and I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that it will answer. It started with a whisper, or maybe it wasn't a whisper at all, but the echo of something ancient and hungry scratching at the edges of our world. We were just kids, bored and looking for a thrill, huddled around a battered Ouija board in Maya's attic. It was supposed to be a joke, a way to pass a rainy Friday night when our parents thought we were doing homework. We'd seen it in movies, read about it online, all the spooky stories, but we never once thought any of it was real. Not truly. Not until the planchette started to move on its own. Not until the air in the stuffy attic turned colder than a December grave. Not until the thing on the other side began to speak to us. It didn't use words at first, just slow, dragging movements across the board, spelling out nonsensical letters that chilled us to the bone. ARNVZT. We laughed it off, nervous, but still convinced it was Maya or Liam pushing it. But the laughter died in our throats when the board spelled out Maya's dead grandmother's name, a name she had never told any of us. That's when the fun stopped and the terror began to bloom. We tried to stop, to shove the board away, but it felt stuck, heavy, like it was nailed to the rickety table. The air thrummed with a low, vibrating sound that felt like it was inside our heads. Then, slowly, painstakingly, letter by letter, it spelled out his name, Sam, my name. And it wasn't asking questions anymore. It was making demands. It wanted something, and the way it moved, the palpable malice radiating from the flimsy piece of wood, told us it would take what it wanted. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath, even though it was late spring outside. The shadows in the attic stretched and danced like mocking figures. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered violently, threatening to plunge us into total darkness. We were trapped with it, tethered to this spectral game, and the price of losing was something far, far worse than just being scared. It was the night our childhood ended, shattered by the touch of something we couldn't understand, something that saw us as nothing more than playthings in its cruel, eternal game. I can still feel the cold on my fingertips, the phantom weight of the planchette, the bone-deep dread that settled in my gut and has never fully left. The first demand was simple, deceptively innocent almost. It spelled out, leave. We looked at each other, confused. Leave the house? Leave the attic? Leave the game? Liam, ever the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, scoffed. All right, Ghosty, we're leaving. He reached for the board, but a sudden, invisible force slammed his hand back. He cried out, shaking his fingers. There was no mark, no bruise, but he held his hand like it was broken. A wave of sickening fear washed over us. This wasn't a joke. The air grew heavy and thick, making it hard to breathe. The planchette began to move again, slower this time, deliberate. Lookathenight. We looked towards the small attic window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple, lit by flashes of distant lightning. The trees outside seemed to writhe in the wind, their branches like skeletal fingers. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the feeling of being watched, of being seen by something unseen, was overwhelming. The board moved again. BEFORETDAWN. Before the dawn. The phrase hung in the cold air, a chilling promise or a terrifying deadline. We didn't know. We were just kids, remember? Just kids who opened a door that should have stayed shut forever. The second demand was clearer, more personal. It spelled out Emily's full name, then GIVEMESOMETHINGYOUCHERISH. Emily's face paled. She was always the quietest of us, the most sensitive. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, looked wide and terrified. What did it want? Her lucky necklace? Her favorite book? The air was getting colder, the silence in the attic broken only by the creaks of the old house settling, sounds that now sounded like groans of pain. The planchette trembled, urgent. Slowly, deliberately, Emily reached for the small silver locket she wore around her neck, a gift from her grandmother before she died. Her hand shook as she unclasped it. As she held it over the board, the temperature plummeted even further. I could see my breath like thick smoke. The planchette shot towards the letter Y for yes, then T for take. With a gasp, Emily dropped the locket onto the board. It didn't land with a clatter. It just vanished. Gone. In its place, a cold spot formed on the wood, a tiny patch of ice that wouldn't melt. Emily stumbled back, tears streaming down her face. We knew then. It wasn't just playing games, it was feeding. The third demand was terrifyingly specific. It spelled out LEAVONEOYOU. That's when the real panic set in. We were friends. We were a group. The idea of leaving one of us behind with that thing was unthinkable. But the air pulsed with a hostile energy, pushing against us. The shadows seemed to deepen, reaching out like grasping hands. The planchette moved erratically, impatiently now. The chilling phrase repeated, ONEOFYOU. We looked at each other, fear plain in our eyes. Who would it be? How would we even choose? It was choosing for us. The planchette lurched, moving towards Liam, then Maya, then me. Every time it moved towards one of us, a wave of intense dread washed over that person. It was toying with us, enjoying our fear. We huddled together, backs to the wall, the Ouija board between us and the terrifying unknown. The single light bulb flickered violently, threatening to extinguish entirely. The creaks of the house were louder now, more insistent, sounding like footsteps coming up the stairs. We were trapped, and the price of our escape was one of us. The fourth demand was a twisted game, a test of our desperation. It spelled out WHOISWAKEST. A gasp went through our little group. It wanted us to turn on each other, to sacrifice the one it deemed weakest. The air was suffocating now, heavy with the smell of dust and something metallic, like old blood. The shadows around the edge of the room seemed to have thickened into solid, oppressive forms. The silence was broken only by our ragged breathing and the insistent, scraping sound of the planchette moving across the board. It spelled out letters that meant nothing to us, a chaotic jumble that somehow conveyed immense anger and impatience. It waited. The pressure in the room built, almost physically painful. We refused to answer. We stood together, trembling but refusing to point fingers. The entity seemed to grow enraged. The board rattled on the table as if unseen hands were shaking it. The single light bulb went out completely, plunging the attic into absolute darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, all we could hear was the sound of the planchette scraping across the wood in the dark. Then, a horrifying whisper, right in my ear, though no one was standing there. SAMIOUAREWAKEST. The final demand was a chilling ultimatum, a descent into pure horror. The light came back on, flickering weakly, but just enough to see the board. It spelled out KNOMYNAME. Knowing its name felt like giving it power, like inviting it fully into our world. We looked at each other, our faces pale and streaked with tears. The attic was filled with an unnatural cold that seemed to seep into our bones. The air crackled with unseen energy. The shadows were alive, moving just outside of our direct vision. The board pulsed with a sickening light from beneath the cheap plastic. We didn't want to do it. We didn't want to know. But the feeling of being cornered, of having no other choice, was overwhelming. The planchette pointed to letters seemingly at random at first, spelling out nonsensical words. Then slowly it began to form a name that felt alien, ancient, and filled with unspeakable malice. Each letter was like a cold splinter in my mind. Z-O-G-F-U, then with a sickening finality, Zogful. As the planchette landed on the final L, a guttural scream ripped through the attic, a sound that was not human, not animal, but something else entirely. It was all around us, echoing from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very air itself. The board lifted slightly off the table, vibrating violently, and then cracked clean in half. A wave of freezing air slammed into us, carrying with it the smell of decay and ozone. Then silence. A thick, heavy silence that felt more terrifying than any noise. We stumbled out of the attic, down the stairs, and out of Maya's house, not stopping until we were miles away. The rain washing over our faces and the rising sun chasing away the shadows. We never spoke of it again, not to each other, not to anyone. But Maya's locket never reappeared. And sometimes, in the darkest nights, I still hear the scraping sound of the planchette and feel the icy grip of something that knows my name. And it's waiting, always waiting. Years later, the memory still burns like ice. We never talked about it, not really. It was easier to pretend it never happened, to bury it deep down. But some nights, especially when it rains and the wind howls like a banshee, I feel it. The cold, the sense of being watched. I check the locks on my doors multiple times. I leave a light on, even though I hate sleeping with the light on. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I think I hear it again. That scraping sound. The sound of a planchette moving across wood, a silent question mark hanging in the air. Did we really close the door? Or did Zogful just step through it into our world, waiting for the right moment to finish the game? I don't know, and I'm terrified I might find out.
It started, like most terrible things do, with something small and easily dismissed. A whisper in the dark. A shadow that flickered just outside my sight. My therapist likes to say it was grief, playing tricks on my mind after Buttons died. Buttons was my rabbit, you see, the only creature that ever seemed to truly understand me. He died unexpectedly. Found him limp in his cage one morning. The quiet that filled my room after that was a physical thing. Heavy and crushing. I was 15, lonely, and desperate. I'd read about Ouija boards online, seen them in movies as corny plot devices. But the articles I found said they could connect you to the beyond, to spirits. Maybe, just maybe, Buttons was still around, waiting for me to find him. It was a stupid, childish hope. I know that now. But when you're 15 and heartbroken, hope, no matter how thin, feels like salvation. I ordered the board online. Plain wood, letters and numbers arranged in a circle, the plastic planchette with a tiny window. It arrived on a Tuesday. I waited until Friday night, until my parents were asleep downstairs, their snores rumbling faintly through the floorboards. I cleared my desk, lit a single plain white candle, and unboxed the board. The wood felt smooth under my fingertips, oddly cold. My hands trembled as I placed the planchette on the board. Buttons, I whispered into the silent room. Are you there? It's Sarah. Nothing, just the flickering candle flame, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I pushed the planchette gently, trying to believe it was moving on its own, trying to conjure a connection through sheer will. Still nothing. Discouraged, I was about to pack it away when the air in the room seemed to thicken. The candle flame dipped wildly, though there was no breeze. A chill, colder than any I'd felt, seeped into my bones. My breath hitched. I placed my fingers back on the planchette. Is someone here? I stammered. The planchette glided slowly, smoothly towards yes. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not Buttons, maybe, but something. Fear warred with a thrill I hadn't expected. Curiosity, sharp and dangerous. Who are you? I managed, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved again, faster this time. Darkness. Darkness. Not a name, not really. A description? My hand shook, but I kept it on the planchette. What do you want? It paused, a long, drawn-out stillness that felt heavy with anticipation. Then it glided to a single letter. H? H? What did H mean? Help? Home? I racked my brain trying to find meaning. H? I asked, feeling foolish talking to a piece of plastic. It moved again. ANDH, and my mind raced. Was this a game? Where was the rest of the message? Then it moved definitively to the numbers. 5. My skin crawled. Was H and 5 some kind of code? A date? A time? I didn't know. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my enthusiasm. Are you a good spirit? I asked, my voice shaking. It flew across the board, straight to no. It lingered there for a moment, as if emphasizing the point. That was it. That was my chance to walk away, to box the board up, throw it in the garbage, pretend it never happened. But the terror was mixed with a strange fascination. And honestly, the sheer novelty of something, anything, breaking through my miserable loneliness was addictive. What if this entity, this darkness, wasn't just some random ghost? Can you help me? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Help me feel less alone. Help me get over buttons. The words were silent prayers in my head, but I hoped the board understood. The planchette moved again. This time, not to letters or numbers. It went straight to the center of the board, to the small, empty space there. It stopped. It didn't move for a long time. Then, very slowly, it began to trace small, deliberate circles. My eyes widened. It was nodding. It was saying yes, a bargain. The thought popped into my head unbidden. The articles had said it was dangerous. They said you shouldn't ask favors. But what did I have to lose? I had nothing. No friends, no future I could see, just the crushing weight of grief and being invisible. What do you want? I asked. What do you need to help me? The planchette took a long time to respond. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then it moved. SMALL, small? Small what? I was confused. Small what? I asked. Did it want a small offering? It moved again. FAVOR, small favors. It wanted small favors in return for its help. It sounded simple enough. Easy. A small price to pay for connection, for a sliver of light in the suffocating darkness I'd been living in. Okay, I whispered, sealing my fate with that single word. Okay. I agree. That night, I felt a shift. Nothing dramatic, not at first. The silence in my room didn't feel quite so lonely. It felt occupied, watched, but not in a bad way, more like a silent companion. And the next day at school, something odd happened. Jessica Miller, the girl who'd been relentlessly teasing me about my worn-out clothes and quiet nature, tripped in the hallway, right in front of everyone. It wasn't a spectacular fall, but she twisted her ankle badly and had to be helped to the nurse's office, tears streaming down her face. A small thing, yes. But later, when I was alone in my room, the planchette on the board vibrated gently. A single yes. The favors started small. A classmate forgetting their homework before a big test. My parents being too tired to notice I hadn't eaten dinner. Little insignificant misfortunes for others, unnoticed boons for me. And each time, a faint vibration from the board, a silent confirmation. It wasn't buttons, this entity. It was something else. Something that listened. Something that delivered. And it wanted favors. The favors grew. Not in size, not at first, but in frequency. And they started feeling less like convenient coincidences and more like deliberate actions. Mrs. Luff Davison, my history teacher, the one who always seemed to go out of her way to call me out in class, had a sudden nasty stomach virus and was out for a week. The day before the school play auditions, the lead girl lost her voice completely. Things weren't just happening anymore. They felt orchestrated. The entity on the board, the one that called itself darkness, didn't speak often. It mostly communicated through the favors and the subtle vibration of the planchette. But sometimes when I asked too many questions about it or about buttons, it would spell out short, chilling sentences. You agreed. It has a price. Don't ask. The favors started to change, too. They weren't just about me getting a little peace or convenience. They started to involve pain, not directly, but I'd ask the board, "Can you make Mark stop bothering me about that essay?" And later that day, Mark would fall down the stairs and sprain his wrist, unable to write. I'd think, I wish Mrs. Henderson would stop giving us so much homework, and her car would get a flat tire on the way to school, making her late and flustered, the homework lesson canceled. My initial relief was quickly replaced by a cold, sinking dread. This wasn't just helping me. This was hurting other people, and it was my fault. I don't like this, I whispered to the board one night, tears stinging my eyes. I don't want these favors anymore. The planchette, which had been still, shot violently across the board. No, but you said small favors, I cried, my voice trembling. This isn't small. The planchette moved again, slower, more deliberate this time. They are the price. You agreed. There is no going back. Fear gripped me. I tried to push the planchette away, but it felt stuck, heavy, glued to my fingertips. A low hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate from inside my own head. The candle flickered wildly, the flame turning a sickly green. The next favor was the worst. I had wished thoughtlessly, angrily, after a particularly humiliating moment in the cafeteria, that the popular girls who laughed at me would just disappear. Not really disappear, of course, just leave me alone. Be gone from my life. The board pulsed with dark energy that night. The next morning there was a news report. A car accident late last night. The 3 girls, all of them, gone. My blood ran cold. My stomach churned. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. This was too horrible, too directly linked to my angry wish. I stared at the board in my room as if it were a poisonous spider. I wanted to destroy it, burn it, bury it. But the thought of touching it, of even being near it, filled me with paralyzing dread. And the entity, I could feel its presence now, like cold breath on my neck, always watching, always waiting for the next favor. It didn't ask for favors anymore. It just expected them. Based on my thoughts, my frustrations, my wishes, however fleeting. If I thought, I wish I didn't have to take that test, the board would vibrate, and the next day something awful would happen that prevented the test. If I felt a pang of jealousy, someone else would suffer a misfortune that seemed related. I became terrified of my own mind, terrified of thinking anything negative, anything selfish, anything that could be interpreted as a favor by the entity. I started isolating myself, going to school, coming home, locking myself in my room. I barely spoke, afraid my words, even under my breath, would trigger something. Food tasted like ash. Sleep offered no escape, filled with nightmares of the girls in the accident, their faces distorted and blaming. The entity's presence grew stronger. The air in my room was constantly cold. Sometimes I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that wasn't mine. The planchette would sometimes move on its own, slowly circling the board, a silent, chilling presence in the room. One night, I woke up to a cold weight on my chest. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A pressure, heavy and cold, pushing down on me. I tried to scream, but my throat was tight, no sound coming out. The air I was breathing felt thick, stale. Then I heard a whisper right next to my ear. Not a voice, not really, but a sound that resonated inside my skull, cold and ancient. Favor. It wasn't asking, it was demanding, and the pressure on my chest intensified, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't about hurting others anymore. It was about me. What did it want from me? My energy? My sanity? My very self? I remember that night most clearly. The crushing weight, the cold whisper, the utter helplessness. That was when I knew I hadn't made a bargain for help. I had opened a door to something that didn't just grant wishes, it consumed them. And it was slowly, methodically consuming me, one small, terrible favor at a time. Years later, the cold is still here. The shadows still flicker, and I'm still terrified of thinking, of wishing, because the price my silent companion demands is always, always paid in blood or tears.
The chalk dust still clings to the corners of my brain, a constant reminder of the classroom, of the night the world tilted on its axis and showed us its teeth. It wasn't the usual kind of terror you read about in books or see in movies. This was personal, because it happened to us, in my classroom, with my students. It started innocently enough, or as innocent as anything involving a Ouija board can be. 3 of my brightest, most curious students, Maya, Leo, and Chloe. They were the kind who stayed after class, asking questions that went beyond the textbook, always pushing the boundaries of what was expected. I was their English teacher, Mr. Harrison, and I thought we had a good rapport, a mutual respect. They were smart kids, maybe a little too smart for their own good sometimes. They came to me after school one Tuesday, buzzing with an energy I couldn't quite place. Maya, the quiet one, usually buried in a book, was practically vibrating with excitement. Leo, our resident science buff, looked uncharacteristically unnerved, his glasses a little crooked. Chloe, the most outgoing of the 3, was doing most of the talking. They wanted to use the classroom after hours. Just for a little bit, they said. A project, something about local folklore, I'm a sucker for enthusiasm, and they promised to clean up. I figured, what harm could it do? Let them stay late once in a while, explore their interests. Big mistake. They brought the board in the next night. It wasn't some kitschy store-bought thing. It was old, heavy, and somehow wrong. The wood was dark and worn, and the letters seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim classroom light. They'd found it in an antique shop downtown, a place even the locals whispered about. They set it up on one of the student desks, right in the middle of the room. The air felt different the moment they laid it out. Colder. Static. I should have shut it down right then and there. My gut screamed at me, a low, persistent thrum of dread. But they were so eager, so convinced this was some kind of fascinating historical artifact. I told myself it was just a game, a bit of teenage mischief. I sat at my desk, pretending to grade papers, but my eyes kept flicking over to them. They sat around the board, fingers lightly touching the planchette. The room was silent, except for their hushed voices and the occasional creak of the old building. Then the planchette moved. Slowly at first, a tiny hesitant glide across the polished wood, then faster, picking up speed. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Leo leaned closer, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing unease. Chloe's eyes were wide, fixed on the board. They asked questions, tentative at first. Is anyone there? The planchette swung to yes. Who are you? It spelled out letters, slow and deliberate. THEWATC. The temperature in the room dropped even further. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. This wasn't a trick. This was something else. They kept asking questions, fueled by a dangerous mix of fear and fascination. They asked about the school, about its history. The answers they got were chilling. Things they couldn't possibly know. Names of former students who had vanished without a trace. Events that had been buried for decades. The planchette flew across the board, sometimes so fast it was a blur. The energy in the room was thick and oppressive, like a suffocating blanket. Then the shadows started to move. Out of the corners of my eyes, I saw fleeting shapes, darker than the already dim lighting should allow. They flickered, danced, coalesced into something that wasn't quite human. A low hum started in the room, vibrating through the floorboards and up into our bones. It wasn't sound from outside. It came from the board, from the air around it. Maya started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. Leo was pale, his hands shaking. Chloe, the brave one, looked utterly terrified, her usual energy completely drained. They tried to pull their fingers away from the planchette, but it felt like it was glued to their touch. They were trapped, tied to whatever was communicating with them. The letters on the board glowed faintly now, a sickly green light. Then the whispers started. Not out loud, but in our heads. Different voices, overlapping, slithering into our thoughts like worms. They were promises, threats, dark secrets we didn't want to know. They spoke of things that had happened in this building, terrible things. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in our minds. The room seemed to stretch and distort around us. The walls pulsed and breathed. I finally found my voice, a hoarse whisper. Stop! Break contact! I lunged forward, trying to grab the board, but an unseen force slammed me backward, sending me tumbling over a desk. I hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of me. I looked up to see the three students convulsing, their bodies arching unnaturally. Their eyes were wide and blank, fixed on something we couldn't see. The planchette was swirling around the board now, faster and faster, a frantic dance answering unspoken questions. Something dark and massive started to rise from the center of the board, a churning vortex of shadow and putrid energy. It thickened, taking a form that defied description, a shifting, amorphous thing with too many angles and too many eyes. It exuded a bone-deep coldness that went beyond temperature, and a smell like old death and ozone. It reached out towards the students with tendrils of darkness. Maya screamed, a sound that was ripped from her very soul. The other two joined her, their voices raw with pure, unadulterated terror. I scrambled to my feet, my body numb, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to do, how to fight something like this. Instinct took over. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a stack of textbooks, and hurled it at the board. It hit with a solid thud, and for a split second, the swirling shadow hesitated. That hesitation was all they needed. With a final, desperate wrench, Maya, Leo, and Chloe tore their hands away from the planchette. The dark form shrieked, a sound that felt like being flayed alive, and recoiled back into the board. The glowing letters faded, the hum died down. The shadows retreated, melting back into the corners of the room. We were left in the sudden, deafening silence, gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably. The Ouija board sat on the desk, looking inert and harmless, but we knew the truth. We knew what lurked beneath its surface. We never touched it again. I made sure they left it behind. That night changed us. The chalk dust will always remind me.
I found the Ouija board in the back corner of that old house. The walls were cracked and peeling, the floorboards creaked with every step. Dust hung heavy in the stale air, and the faint smell of mold clung to everything. It sat there, half buried under a broken pile of newspapers. The faded letters on the wood caught my eye. Ouija, it said. I was curious, so I picked it up and brushed off the dirt. It felt colder than it should, like it had been waiting. That night, I called my two closest friends, Maya, who believed in all sorts of strange things, and Ryan, the skeptic who never missed a chance to make fun of those beliefs. We gathered in my apartment, everything lit by soft lamps and the flicker of incense smoke. The air was thick with nervous excitement. The board lay on the coffee table between us, its worn surface catching the light. "Let's see if anything's home," Maya whispered, eyes wide. We all put our fingers lightly on the planchette. The room seemed to hold its breath. At first, nothing moved. Then, the planchette shifted slowly, spelling out the word hello. We exchanged glances. Ryan rolled his eyes but said, "Nice prank, Maya." We asked questions, taking turns. The answers were vague, words like wait and help. The board spelled out trap souls. My heart started to race. Shadows in the corner of the room seemed to flicker, but when I looked, nothing was there. I tried to laugh it off. Ryan cracked a joke to ease the tension. Maya looked more serious, gripping the edge of the couch. The board suddenly spelled out something chilling. Don't trust. The air grew cold, and I felt something watching us. I wanted to stop, but my fingers stayed on the planchette. The night had just begun. After that warning, things got worse fast. The lights flickered like they could go out any second. The room dropped in temperature, and Maya wrapped her arms around herself, her face pale. I swear I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft at first, then closer. We told ourselves it was just the house settling or the old wiring acting up. But it didn't stop there. The planchette moved again, spelling out stay. My fingers trembled, but I didn't dare pull away. Maya whispered, "We shouldn't do this." Ryan laughed nervously but looked uneasy. Suddenly, the sound of something sliding down the wall behind us made us all jump. The shadow near the corner stretched longer, darker. It wasn't just a trick of the light. Ryan was the first to break. "I'm out," he said, standing up quickly. He grabbed his jacket and left, not waiting for a goodbye. The door shut like a slam, and the quiet afterward was deafening. Maya looked to me, eyes wide with fear. "Now it's just us," she said quietly. I nodded, even though my heart pounded like a drum. That night, sleep was impossible. When I finally drifted, the nightmares attacked. Faces with hollow eyes stared from the dark. I felt invisible hands reach out, grabbing at me. Each time I woke, the whispers from the walls clung to my ears like a cold shadow. Daylight offered no relief. The line between dreams and reality blurred. I caught movement from the corner of my eye, figures just beyond sight. My phone never rang. Maya stopped answering messages. I was alone in the apartment, trapped by something I didn't understand but knew was waiting. The Ouija board sat silent on the table, but the fear it released never went away. The room felt like it was closing in. Shadows moved in the corners like living things. I sat in the middle of the floor, the Ouija board before me, its worn letters glowing faintly under the dim light. I reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the planchette. It moved on its own, slow at first, then more urgent. The board spelled out, "Trapped here." I swallowed hard, voice shaking. "Who are you?" The planchette slid to spell, "Damned souls." Suddenly, the walls seemed to pulse, dark shapes swirling just out of reach. I could hear their voices, faint but angry. They told me their story, how they were caught by the board long ago, souls desperate for release. But the more they begged, the clearer it became they wanted to take me with them, to drag me into their endless prison. I tried to push the board away, but it stuck like it belonged to my skin. I was no longer in my apartment. The walls stretched and warped. Faces with empty eyes appeared in the shadows, reaching out. The whispers became screams. I screamed too, trying to break free, but it was useless. The board was a trap, and now I was caught. I don't know how long I've been here, caught in a loop of darkness and voices. Sometimes I hear people laughing far away, friends like Maya and Ryan, who left me behind. I try to warn anyone who might find this board, but all I can do is whisper in the dark. The last message the board spelled out for me was clear: never open. Now I live in the echoes of the damned, hoping someone hears me before they fall into the same trap. But the shadows are hungry, and the night never ends.
The splinter is still there, a tiny, almost invisible shard of plastic lodged deep under my thumbnail, a constant, burning reminder of the night we messed with the board. Sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I see a faint, swirling pattern, like ancient wood grain, and the smell of ozone and damp earth fills my nose, even when I'm standing in a bright, sterile room. It's been 5 years since that night, and every single one of them has been a slow, agonizing climb out of a hole we dug ourselves, a hole that started with a cheap, plastic Ouija board and 3 stupid, curious teenagers who thought they were invincible. It was Sarah who found it first, tucked away in the dusty attic of her grandmother's old farmhouse. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that hangs heavy with possibility and boredom. We were sprawled on musty blankets, the sun filtering through a cobweb-dusted window, talking about nothing important. Sarah was the adventurous one, always pushing boundaries, always daring us to do something stupid. Mark was the skeptic, the one who rolled his eyes and muttered about pseudoscience and confirmation bias. And I was the one who just wanted to fit in, to be part of the group, even if it meant ignoring the knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The board itself was old, the kind that looked like it had seen things. It had a wooden planchette, worn smooth by countless hands, and the letters and numbers etched into the surface seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. Sarah, all wide eyes and a grin that was a little too excited, held it up like a trophy. "Look what I found," she yelled, her voice echoing in the dusty space. "A genuine Ouija board." Mark scoffed, shoving a hand through his messy brown hair. "Please, Sarah, you actually believe in that stuff?" But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hesitant curiosity that gave Sarah the opening she needed. She started on about spirits and the great beyond, using words she must have read in some cheesy horror novel. I just nodded, trying to look interested, while my gut screamed at me to run, to get far away from that creepy attic and that even creepier board. But Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and soon even Mark was leaning forward, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows, we were sitting around the board, fingers on the planchette, whispering questions into the thickening air. The first few attempts were just us giggling and pushing the planchette ourselves, trying to spook each other. Sarah would gasp and pretend the planchette was moving on its own, and Mark would let out a fake scream. We were having fun in that way teenagers do when they're teetering on the edge of something they don't understand. But then came the cold. It wasn't just the chill of the aging house. It was a deep, bone-aching cold that crept in from nowhere, settling around us like a shroud. The air grew heavy, stale, and the dust motes dancing in the last rays of light seemed to still. And then, slowly, hesitantly, the planchette began to move. It wasn't a quick, jerky movement like before. This was slow, deliberate, a smooth glide across the board. We held our breath, our fingers trembling against the warm wood. The planchette stopped on H. Then, after a long, silent pause, it slid to E, followed by L, and finally, L. Sarah's breath hitched. Mark's smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, stunned expression. My own blood felt like ice water in my veins. We hadn't moved it. We couldn't have. It was too smooth, too confident. That was the first time the knot in my stomach wasn't just unease. It was pure, unadulterated terror. We asked its name. The planchette moved again, faster this time, spelling out something that made my heart pound against my ribs: Zazzle. The name felt wrong, thick and sharp on my tongue when I silently repeated it. Mark, the skeptic, was silent, his eyes wide and fixed on the board. As the questions continued, a strange energy filled the room. The answers came faster, more confident, spelling out things about ourselves that chilled us to the bone, secrets we'd never shared, fears we'd buried deep. The air grew colder still, and a faint, unpleasant smell, like rotting garbage and something metallic, began to fill the attic. It was around this time that we noticed the shadows. They weren't just the shadows cast by the fading light, they were deeper, darker, clinging to the corners of the room and seeming to shift and writhe just at the edge of our vision. Sarah started whimpering, her face pale. Mark kept muttering, "It's just the wind, it's just the house settling," but his voice lacked conviction. The planchon suddenly slammed hard against the word goodbye. Not gently, but with a sharp, violent impact that made the entire board jump. We snatched our hands away as if burned. The cold vanished instantly, replaced by the usual stuffy attic air. The shadows receded, and the foul smell faded. We looked at each other, a mixture of relief and lingering dread etched on our faces. Wed opened a door, and whatever had come through hadn't stayed on the other side. That night was just the beginning. The weird things started small. Objects would move on their own, a book falling off a shelf when no one was near, a door swinging open and closed in an empty room. We'd hear whispers when we were alone, just faint, indistinct sounds that seemed to come from the corners of the house. Sarah was the most affected. She started having terrible nightmares, filled with scratching sounds and whispering voices. She became withdrawn, jumpy, always looking over her shoulder. Mark tried to rationalize it, talking about stress and overactive imaginations, but his eyes held a fear he couldn't hide. I felt it too, that constant sense of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond the veil of our reality. The splinter under my nail appeared a few days after that night, like a tiny, agonizing reminder of the connection we'd made. It felt like a part of the board, a part of whatever we'd contacted, was now physically embedded in me. The activity escalated. One night, Mark was home alone when he heard a loud crash from his study. He went to investigate and found all the books piled neatly on the floor, in a perfect square, facing inward. Another time, Sarah was in her room when her stereo suddenly blasted static at maximum volume, then shut off just as quickly. These weren't just spooky coincidences anymore. These were deliberate acts designed to terrify us. We tried talking about it, huddled in Sarah's bedroom one rainy afternoon, hushed voices masking our fear. Mark, the skeptic, was the first to admit it. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Something is happening." We knew, deep down, that it was connected to the Ouija board, to the name Zazel. The climax came a few weeks later, on a night so dark and stormy it felt like the sky itself was trying to swallow us whole. We were back at Sarah's house, the only place that felt even remotely safe, though we knew the safety was an illusion. The power went out, plunging the house into absolute darkness, save for the sporadic flashes of lightning. The whispers started almost immediately, louder now, more distinct. They were taunting, malicious, calling our names. Then came the scratching, a relentless scraping sound from inside the walls. It was everywhere, surrounding us, closing in. A terrifying gust of wind ripped through the house, though all the windows and doors were closed. The air grew arctic cold once more, carrying that same metallic, foul stench. In a flash of lightning, I saw a shadow in the hallway, taller and darker than any normal shadow, its outline distorted and wrong. It seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Sarah screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. Mark grabbed her, pulling her back, his face a mask of fear. The sound of something heavy dragging across the floor upstairs echoed through the house. We knew, with sickening certainty, that it was coming for us. We scrambled for the front door, fumbling with the lock, the whispers and scratching growing louder, closer. The air crackled with a terrifying electrical charge. Just as we burst out into the storm, we heard a final, earth-shaking crash from inside the house, followed by an unnerving silence. We ran, not stopping until our lungs burned and the rain plastered and stung us. We never went back inside that farmhouse. We never talked about Zazel or the board again, not really. We tried, in the weeks that followed, to pretend it never happened, to convince ourselves it was just our imaginations, fueled by fear and a creepy old house. But the fear remained, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of our lives. Sarah moved away a few months later, unable to shake the nightmares. Mark still gets jittery around old houses and hates the smell of dust. And me, well, I have the splinter. 5 years later, and it still burns, a physical connection to that night, a reminder that some doors are best left closed. I see things sometimes, in the corner of my eye, just glimpses of movement, shadows that don't quite belong. I hear things too, faint whispers on the wind, the distant sound of scratching. I tell myself it's just my mind playing tricks, the lingering effects of a terrible experience. But deep down, in the marrow of my bones, I know. Whatever we summoned that night, whatever Zazzle is, it's still out there. And sometimes, when the splinter flares up and the air grows cold, I think it remembers us too. It remembers the night we played with fire and got burned.
The brush felt heavy, useless. My studio, usually a sanctuary of creativity, was a tomb of blank canvases. Days bled into weeks, and nothing, not a single spark. My landlady, a sweet woman named Eliza, had hinted more than once about the overdue rent. Despair, a thick, suffocating blanket, was pressing down on my chest. I stared at the stark white canvas, the fear of failure a cold knot in my stomach. I was an artist, or at least I used to be. Every line felt forced, every color dull. I was drying up, shriveling away. I'd lost it, all of it, the passion, the skill, the very reason I breathed. The silence of the room was mocking, echoing my creative void. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the window of a dusty antique shop amidst cracked teacups and forgotten trinkets was a Ouija board. It wasn't the cheap plastic kind. This was old, made of dark polished wood, intricately carved with unsettling symbols around its edge. The planchette was a smooth teardrop shape, cool to the touch even through the glass. A strange pull, like a desperate whisper, drew me in. Maybe it was just a novelty, something to break the creative block. A different kind of inspiration, perhaps. I bought it, half out of curiosity, half out of a desperate, fleeting hope. It pulsed with an unexpected energy, dark and inviting. Back in the studio, a strange excitement mixed with a shiver of fear as I laid the board on the floor. The air grew heavy, like before a storm. I placed my fingers on the planchette, heart thumping a crazy rhythm against my ribs. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, my voice barely a rustle. The planchette trembled, then slid, slowly, deliberately. The board spelled out, "Yes." My breath caught. My hand wasn't moving it. There was a chill in the room, even though the windows were closed. Then the board spelled out, "Draw." My eyes darted to my blank canvas, a sudden inspiration, sharp and clear, surging through me. It was like a dam had broken, colors and shapes flooding my mind. I picked up a charcoal stick, and my hand moved on its own, frantic, intense. The drawing that emerged was unsettling, dark and strange, unlike anything I had ever created before. It was a swirling vortex of shadows with an eye in the center, an eye that seemed to watch me. Yet, it was undeniably powerful, captivating. The next night, I felt the familiar pull, a restless urge to return to the board. This time, I lit candles, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. I wanted more of that unsettling inspiration. "What should I draw now?" I asked. The planchette moved, faster this time, demanding. The board spelled out pain. A shiver ran down my spine, but the artistic rush was too strong to ignore. I began to paint. The brushstrokes were violent, frenzied. My hands, guided by an invisible force, created a canvas of twisted limbs, screaming faces, and the raw agony of shattered glass. The colors were lurid, sickeningly real. When I was done, sweat beaded on my forehead, my body trembling. The painting was disturbing, too real, but undeniably a masterpiece. It hummed with a dark energy, and I could almost hear the screams coming from it. This went on for days. Each session with the board brought forth another twisted creation. My landlord Eliza complimented my newfound burst of creativity, but her eyes held a hint of worry when she saw the finished pieces. She asked about the dark themes. I told her it was a new phase, a deeper exploration of human suffering. She didn't press, but the paintings began to feel heavy, their darkness seeping into the studio, into me. I felt constantly drained, yet unable to stop. It was like an addiction. My sleep was filled with nightmares, and my days blurred into a single frantic cycle of paint, board, despair, and then the dark rush of creating more monstrous art. The things I was painting, they weren't just images. They were feelings, real and raw, and I felt them deeply. One evening, as I stared at a particularly grotesque piece, a chilling realization hit me. The eyes in the paintings, they were changing. They weren't just eyes, they were windows, and something truly evil was peering back through them. I saw a hint of red, a flicker of something truly ancient and malevolent. It wasn't just inspiring me, it was feeding on me, on my fear, on my creative energy, twisting it into something unholy. The board had spelled out "feed us" the previous night, and I had dismissed it as a morbid joke. But now the words echoed in my mind, cold and real. My masterpieces were becoming gateways, not just for inspiration, but for something else entirely. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I heard a faint scratching sound coming from within the newest painting on the easel. It was subtle at first, then louder, like claws on wood. Panic seized me. I had to stop. I had to destroy it. All of it. I grabbed a palette knife, my hand shaking violently, and lunged for the board. I had to break its hold, sever the connection. But as my fingers grazed the slick wood, the planchette slammed back to no. A gust of icy air swirled around me, extinguishing the candles. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint, sickly glow from the paintings. The scratching from the canvas intensified, joined by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The board spelled out, "You are ours." I screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from my throat. The darkness in the room thickened, a tangible presence. I felt cold, clammy hands on my shoulders, pulling me back towards the easel. I fought, kicking and thrashing, but a force, stronger than anything I'd ever known, dragged me closer to the newest, terrifying image. The eye in the painting pulsed with red light. I felt myself being drawn in, not just my body, but my very essence, pulled into the horrifying gateway I had created. The last thing I saw was Alex, my reflection in that awful canvas, her eyes wide with a terror that would never end, consumed completely by the monstrous art. I never saw the outside again, nor the sunshine. My studio became a living canvas, and I, the endless paint. The creations continued, fueled by something cold and eternal, a constant, sickening masterpiece of despair. And sometimes, if you look closely enough, if you listen very, very closely, you can still hear the faint, echoing screams from within the masterpiece, a tiny, tormented sound in the silence of the studio.
The smell of old wood and something sickly sweet still throws me back to that attic. It was just a game, they said. A harmless old Ouija board, dug out of a dusty box during a thunderstorm, with the wind rattling the panes, making every shadow dance like a hungry spirit. We just wanted to scare ourselves. You know, the kind of cheap thrills you get when you're too young to know better. Little did I know, the real darkness wasn't outside, in the lightning-blasted night, but patiently waiting for an invitation. And we, in our stupid, naive curiosity, were about to throw open the door. It started like any other late-night hang. There was me, James, and Liam. James, always the skeptic, just wanted to prove it was all fake. Liam, the quiet one, was already half believing it before we even touched the planchette. I was somewhere in between, excited by the creepiness but ready to write it off as our own fingers pushing. We lit a single candle, its flame flickering, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and shrink with every gust of wind against the windows. The attic was usually just a storage space, full of forgotten furniture and boxes of memories. But that night, it felt different, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. The board itself was old, its lettering faded in places, the wood cool and smooth under our fingertips. "All right," James said, trying to sound brave, his voice a little lower than usual. "Who wants to ask first?" Liam just stared at the board, his eyes wide. I decided to go for it. "Is anyone here?" I whispered, half joking, half terrified. The planchette sat still for a long moment, and James almost smirked. Then, slowly, with a grinding, almost reluctant drag, it began to move. It glided towards yes. My blood ran cold. James jerked his hand back. "No," he muttered, but his face was pale. Liam and I kept our fingers on it. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. The planchette moved again, faster this time, darting across the letters as if pulled by an invisible string. It spelled out ELLA. We exchanged glances. Ella? James repeated, a nervous laugh escaping him. What do you want, Ella? I asked. The air in the attic grew colder, raising goosebumps on my arms. The board spelled out TRUTH. That's when things got really weird. We asked more questions, the kind of silly questions you ask a ghost. Are you old? YES. Are you happy? NO. Then Liam, quiet as always, asked, how did you die? The planchette paused for a long time, hovering over the letters. The candle flame dipped low, almost going out. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, it slammed into SHESTPTHROUO. We all looked at each other, confused. What did that even mean? We pressed on, hoping for more answers, for a clearer picture of Ella. But the responses became less coherent, more frantic. The planchette spun in circles, darted to numbers, and sometimes seemed to spell out gibberish. We decided to call it a night, ready to say goodbye, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. It just clung to the center. James, frustrated, tried to force it off. That's when the real horror began. The attic door, which we had firmly closed, creaked open, revealing nothing but the dark landing outside. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, even though the windows were latched. The candle on the board flickered violently, then snuffed out, plunging us into darkness. We scrambled for our phones, the sudden blackness a thick, smothering blanket. A faint, terrible whisper slithered through the air, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a weeping sound, full of misery and something ancient. We could feel something else in the room, a presence that wasn't just a cold spot, but a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on us. Then a chilling, soft touch grazed the back of my neck. I gasped, stumbling backward, tripping over something in the dark. We didn't need to say anything. We just stumbled our way out of that attic, down the creaking stairs, and out of the house. We never went back, into that attic. Not really. The house itself felt different after that, colder, like a quiet hum of sorrow filled the air. Things moved on their own, whispers echoed when no one was around, and a faint, sweet smell, like decay and old flowers, sometimes wafted through the hallways. We tried to forget, to laugh it off as a game gone wrong, a trick of the mind. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear that dreadful weeping, and I wonder what exact truth Ella wanted to tell us, what she stepped through, and if she ever really left. The smell of old dust and something sickly sweet like decaying flowers still clings to my memory from that night. It was the kind of smell that promises bad things, a heavy cloak thrown over everything, even the silly teenage laughter we started with. We thought it was just a game, a way to make the Friday night a little less boring. Just a piece of cardboard, some letters, and a triangle of plastic. Innocent, right? Only it wasn't. It never is. We were holed up in a dusty attic, the kind with sloped ceilings and a single grime-covered window that showed only the black shapes of tree branches outside. There were 4 of us. I was there, sitting on a worn rug, my knees almost touching the old wood floor. Across from me was a friend, quiet, always taking things too seriously. Beside him was another friend, the one who always pushed boundaries, always dared us to go further. And then there was a different one, the kind who laughed the loudest but had eyes that always seemed a little too wide, like he already knew a secret. Wed lit a few candles, their flickering light making the shadows dance like mocking figures on the walls. The old Ouija board, a relic from the friend's grandmother's things, sat between us, its faded letters almost glowing in the dimness. Friend number 1, the quiet one, started it. He asked a simple question. Is anyone here? Nothing happened for a while. We joked, we nudged the planchette a bit, trying to make it move on our own. Then a shiver ran through us, not from the cold, but from something else. The planchette moved. Slowly at first, like someone pushing it through thick mud, then with more purpose. It spelled out yes. My breath hitched. Friend number 2, the daredevil, laughed, a nervous sound. Who are you? He asked, his voice suddenly thinner than before. The planchette glided, smooth as silk now, spelling out Lily. We all looked at each other, our eyes wide in the flickering candlelight. None of us knew a Lily. Friend number 3, the one with the wide eyes, grew very still. His laugh disappeared. He just stared at the board. What do you want, Lily? I asked, my voice a whisper. The air got colder, like someone had opened a freezer door right there in the attic. The candles flickered wildly, threatening to go out. The planchette moved to PLAY. A chill went down my spine. This wasn't some silly parlor trick anymore. This felt real. Friend number 2, the daredevil, suddenly looked pale. Even he seemed to be losing his nerve. He tried to pull his finger from the planchette, but it was like it was stuck, held down by an invisible force. The planchette moved again, faster this time. It spelled hide and seek. Friend number 3, the one with the wide eyes, let out a choked sound, a quick gasp. "Stop," he croaked. "We need to stop." But it was too late. The atmosphere in the room changed, turned heavy and thick like old syrup. A deep, cold presence filled the attic, pushing against us, squeezing the air out of our lungs. The board wasn't asking anymore. It was demanding. Friend number 2, the brave one, tried to slide the planchette off the board, but it wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, his knuckles white. The planchette shot across the board to goodbye. But it wasn't a friendly farewell. As soon as it hit the word, a loud bang came from downstairs, like something heavy had fallen. We all flinched, jumping up, knocking over a candle. Darkness swallowed us for a moment, before the one remaining candle cast its weak light again. We scrambled down the creaky attic stairs, tripping over each other. The house, which had been silent before, was now filled with the sound of a soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards below. It sounded like it was coming from the living room. We huddled at the bottom of the stairs, fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The dragging sound stopped. Then we heard it. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing, like dry leaves rustling. It started faint, then grew stronger, clearer. It was coming from the living room, just beyond the closed door. The board had spelled out hide and seek, and now the seeker was here. We backed away slowly, silently, towards the kitchen, towards the back door. But the door to the living room slowly, agonizingly began to open. A sliver of blackness appeared in the widening gap. No outline of a person, just a deeper shadow within the already dim hallway. And then a small, sharp sound, like a child giggling, echoed from the darkness within the living room. It was a sweet, innocent sound, but it made my blood run cold. It wasn't Lily. It was something else. Something that had been waiting. Something that had answered. We burst out the back door, not caring about the path or the gravel digging into our feet. We just ran, stumbled, and ran some more into the cold night air, not looking back. We never spoke about that night again, not truly. We tried to pretend it never happened, that it was just a bad dream. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still smell that sickly sweet scent, and I hear that child's giggle, faint but clear. And I know with a terrible certainty that the game isn't over. It never really ends when you play with things you don't understand.